Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to have a look at 5 new Fuji JPEG recipes. I've been out of the Fuji scene for about a year, which means there's a lot of JPEG recipes out there that I haven't tried. So to kick off 2025, I deleted the ones that were already on here and I've added 5 new ones that we're going to go through today. Now, as always, with these videos, it's not me that made the recipe. I'm going to be sharing people's socials and websites throughout this video, and if you like their recipe, make sure you go and tell them. I always get with these videos people asking me whether or not this recipe will work with their camera or their sensor. The reality is they will have been made with a certain sensor in mind, but just key in as many settings as you can and you'll still get the kind of effects and direction that the recipe was intended to go in, and then just have a little bit of a tweak and a play. That's half the fun with these recipes, is just having a bit of an experiment. Now, after we've gone through the 5 recipes, at the end of the video, I'm then going to show you the same image with the 5 recipes applied, so you can actually see a good side-by-side and decide which ones you like best. But without much further ado, let's get cracking with the first recipe. So first up then, recipe number 1 is TOMAS DERNERS Classic Negative. Now, he actually has 2 different versions of this recipe on his website, and we're going to be using version 1. Now, kind of the downside with version 1 is it does have a fixed white balance. However, I actually find myself preferring this recipe over V2. The V2 has an auto white balance that definitely makes it a little bit more versatile, but for daylight shooting, I genuinely do prefer version 1. Now, this has actually become a bit of a staple on my cameras. I was actually using this a little bit before the start of this year, and I really like the muted look. Now, the muted colours come from the fact that the colour setting is -2, which combined with classic negative leads to this really nice washed out filmic look. The clarity setting at +3 also adds a pretty big kick of contrast to the midtones, which gives you this kind of gritty look. And overall, I love this recipe when it comes to overcast days. When your images are already lacking a little bit of colour, so adding that kind of muteness in doesn't take too much away from the image, it just kind of dulls what's already there. This is a recipe that's become a staple for me, especially given the UK weather at the minute. Next up then, for recipe number 2, we've got a recipe that seems to have taken over the space by storm. It seems to be absolutely everywhere, but it is for good reason, and that is classic Cuban negative by Osan Bilgi. Unlike the previous recipe, this one packs an awful lot of warmth and colour. The 2 recipes actually go hand in hand very well as complete opposites. If you're a friend of the channel, you'll know that I have this pretty strong preference towards warm images. Over on my Instagram, most of my images have a warm tint, so this one is one of my favourites. Now, one of the reasons that this recipe is so versatile is its auto white balance. Being auto means you can use this recipe in just about any condition and it still looks good. Because there's some recipes out there with fixed white balances that as soon as you're not in a sunny day, just don't look good. Next up then, for recipe number 3, we've got a recipe called Cloud Ultra by Ross and his JPEGs. Now, if you haven't heard of Ross and his JPEGs, you need to go and check out his YouTube channel. It is an absolute goldmine of content that I've been loving working through recently. Ross describes this recipe on his website as a recipe for the cloudy days that he gets in Northern Ireland. Over here in England, we've had pretty much the same recently, so this is a recipe that works very well based on the current conditions we have here. Now, we did actually take a trip over to the coast of Wales last year at some point, and a lot of that trip had overcast weather, and applying his recipes to it, well, to be honest with you, some of them look better than the raw files that I played around with in Lightroom. The only thing that I've tweaked with this recipe a little bit is changing the +3 shadows to +1. I found that having +3 shadows meant that they were a little bit too dark, that I found myself overexposing a little bit too much, that I started to clip the highlights. I feel like putting shadows on +1 instead of +3 makes it a little bit easier for me to expose without hitting the top of my highlights in my image. Next up then, for recipe number 4, we have a black and white recipe by a guy called Luis Costa. His website, Life Unintended, is also a goldmine of information, so make sure you check it out. But his recipe, coloured black and white, has a little bit of a trick to it that's similar to my own black and white recipe, and that's the fact that it's not actually purely black and white. Due to the monochromatic colour setting, it actually has a slightly warm purple tint to it. Now, what I find with this is it takes what can sometimes feel like very stale black and white images and just add a little bit of life to them, as if they've been printed and then kind of worn over time. They're not truly black and white, and I think they're all the better for it. If you haven't played around with this monochromatic setting before for your black and white photos, honestly give it a go. Don't go too mad with it, stay somewhere near the middle, but just a little bit of a tweak can make a really big difference to how your black and white images feel. The other settings in terms of the highlights and the shadows and the clarity all add to a nice contrasty look, which along with the grain settings being large and strong, gives the overall image quite a gritty feel. So lastly then, for recipe number 5, we actually have a Velvia recipe. Now I've really struggled to make a Velvia recipe that I like, but Max El Hike, he has nailed it. Now before you actually dial in this recipe, I urge you to go and have a look at his website. His photography is next level, and the way that it's presented on his website, I found myself clicking all around it, even though for me, it's all in French. I don't understand any of the words, but the images look so good. Now his recipe is the Velvia Everyday Max recipe, and like the name suggests, this recipe works for just about everything. I found myself using this on loads of my images when I don't really know what I want. All I'm really looking for is like normal life, just dialed up a little bit. And this is where this recipe delivers. It doesn't matter what image I put it on, it always seems to look good. I've tried for so long to get a Velvia recipe to look right, because I find that the Velvia simulation just looks a little bit too vibrant, and it's hard to dial it back but not go too far either way. He's managed to nail it mainly by, I think, using the color setting of -2. That helps put it back a little bit, and then I think we've got some clever white balance offset playing around with some of the colors too. This is a recipe that suits everyday shooting, no matter what your scenario. Next up then, let's do a quick side-by-side. TOMAS DERNERS classic negative with its washed out look. Classic Cuban, a bit of a warmer tone to it. Cloud Ultra, it's really dark in them shadows, but actually a slight purple tint. Then got coloured black and white, which in this lineup of coloured images, it's kind of hard to tell that it has that bit of colour in there. And then Max Everyday Velvia, that little saturation kick. Going through them one by one, that TOMAS DERNERS gritty negative look and this classic Cuban, they just go so well together as a good pairing. Then got Cloud Ultra, a little bit too dark maybe in the shadows again here. Got coloured black and white. This one, I feel like you can see that warm tint to it. And Max Everyday Velvia, it just looks good on everything. Depending on what you're viewing on, this may look a little bit small, but here's all of them next to each other. I just think they all look so good in their own way. And then transitioning onto something that's a little bit brighter. Again, each of these is so good depending on what you're looking for. This is why all 5 of these are going to be living on my X100V. So there we have it then. That is the 5 recipes that are going to be programmed into my X100V to kick off 2025. Now, as I've said throughout this whole video, none of these recipes are mine. So if you've enjoyed one of these recipes and you're going to try one out, make sure you let the original creator know. Now, if you want more recipe videos, then I have made lots of these before. I think I made 2 in 2024 and 2 in 2023. I'll link those down in the description as well if you want some more ideas, along with my own recipes as well. But if you've enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like and subscribe. There is plenty more stuff like this coming. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.